Conor McGregor. What will Conor do? What should Conor do in his first fight back? Now, I don't love the idea if Conor wants to be the champion of the world, which is what he says. I don't love the idea that he gets thrown right back to the wolves right off the bat. That is going to be something that Conor's going to have to deal with, and we're all going to have to deal with because he's too big of a draw. He commands too much attention and too much money to fight anybody other than a top guy. But I only bring that to you because if you're out for a period of time, you have the right to come back. You have your right to put your toe in the pool. Boxers do it all the time. They call it a tune-up fight. Now, a tune-up fight is meant to be very condescending, that you're looking past this opponent and you're just doing him for preparation. It's hard to sell a tune-up fight. I'm just sharing with you that it's very common. And I do think that Conor versus Dustin Poirier Part 2 was that comeback fight. I have never seen Conor look so bad. Conor won a whole bunch of minutes of that fight. Conor put up a damn hard fight. It's still the worst that I've ever seen Conor look. His body physically looked the weakest. His timing seemed to be off. I'm being critical here. But many people believe that Conor is the greatest fighter to have ever done it. He was a simultaneous champion in 45 and 55 at the same time, which are the hardest weight classes the sport has. He was king of both of them. So you got to be real critical. To find something with Conor, but there was a performance somewhere that was Conor's worst, just as there was a performance somewhere that was Conor's best. I have identified the return fight, Poirier Part 2, as his single worst performance. And if we are right that Conor, like all human beings, has a tendency to not come off the shelf and look as good as when he was active, we're recreating that as he has been forced to the shelf with the injury. So whatever Conor was able to do, and I'm talking about prior to the return fight, Poirier Part 2, whatever he was able to do to simulate real fighting in the gym, he's now not even able to do that. It's now not his choice. He's having to get creative with the things that he can do for working out. I've seen a lot of the videos. He does a good job. He puts them out. He shows us. I mean, the other day, he's got a weight around him and he's doing pull-ups, and very different from fighting, though. So if we've already been shown once that Conor has the same tendencies that every other human being alive does, which is to come back and not quite be in your top form, he's now forced to do it again. Who should he fight? I think that should be a piece of his equation when he comes back. I don't think I'm going to get my way. I don't think Conor agrees with me, for one. I don't think Conor cares about that, for two. Conor may not be aware of it, for three. But they are talking about giving Conor a world title fight right when he comes back. That conversation did not go away. That got called to Dana White one time, and Dana did not dismiss it. He didn't commit to it, but he did not dismiss it at all. Daniel Cormier was conducting an interview with Dana, brought that topic up. Dana said, I'll tell you one thing about Conor. That guy has fought anybody, anytime. That guy can go anywhere and he can do anything. That seemed like the door was open. We've already heard from Charles Oliveira. He wants the fight. Got to see if he's the champion at the time, but Justin Gaethje wants the fight with McGregor. So it seemed like everybody's wide open to the idea, and you have to consider that in. I think that's probably unlikely. I don't know that, in fact, Dana is as open to the idea as he said, but all I have is the one comment that he made, and he certainly wasn't closed to the idea. But you have to take that in conjunction with Poirier and Diaz have both dismissed Conor all in the last week. That is nothing more than negotiating. I understand it. Don't think you have to correct me, but it's the first time ever anybody's dismissed Conor. And in this case, it's Conor's two greatest rivals, and they both teamed up, and they both said no. No to him and yes to each other. So let's just say that everybody's being sincere here, and you've taken those pieces off the board. If you take Dustin and you take Nate and you move them aside as it pertains to Conor, you're left going, well, what do we do? Now I think I would like to see Conor fight for the belt most. Now I think that does make the most sense. Very hard to imagine a scenario if it's not a world title fight, it's not Nate in a trilogy, it's not Poirier in a quadruple. What are we doing with Conor McGregor? It's a real question, and it's not one that we get faced very often in the sport. I don't think we've been faced with it in the last decade of Conor McGregor being in the sport. What do you do with Conor? You pick between really great options. This would be the first time when those really great options are smaller than they generally are, and I'm not sure that Conor has to come back at 55. I mean, that's another part of being out. Another part of that human reality of being, we don't get smaller with time, we get bigger. Conor's done some of his best work at 170 pounds. Conor McGregor versus Cowboy Cerrone is amongst the greatest versions of Conor that you've ever seen. I will remind you, it was at 170 pounds. So that would open up a whole nother Pandora's box. Because it could still be Poirier and it could still be Nate. With Nate, it's for sure going to be at 170, and Poirier has alluded that he'd like to go to 170. Why would they both cut weight if they're both going to get big anyway? It could likely be at 170. If it's at 170, we're having a whole other conversation. If it's what 170 and we have the ability as the viewer to draw parity for McGregor between two different weight classes, that's information we would like to have, right? There's no telling what we would do with that. There's no telling where we would match Conor up. That even brings back at least a possibility of getting McGregor and Usman in there together. I apologize, Masvidal in there together. I think that's a conversation we would have some fun breaking down and debating back and forth. But the first thing we have to do is when Conor comes back, at what weight class will he do it? And if we have a Poirier's Diaz to look forward to, and I'm leaning in the direction that we do, you've just removed two meaningful players from the board. And you do start to give a good look as to who's left and what makes the most sense. All of a sudden, Conor McGregor coming right into a world title fight against either Gaethje or Oliveira. It's not as far out of an idea as perhaps it appeared the first time we heard it 3 months ago.